Okay, now let's go to the alimentary canal. Let's start with the pharynx. Okay, so for the pharynx, the lining epithelium is basically stratified squamous epithelium. And then the deeper layers would still contain your muscle tissue. And upon zooming in, we can see that you have your stratified squamous epithelium. And again, depending on the species, if it needs further protection, it can have cornification. But majority of animals would not have this corneal layer here. So this would be a mucous or wet type of epithelium. And then the deeper area would still be your lamina propria, containing connective tissues as well as blood vessels, and deeper areas would contain your submucosa, and your deeper areas would contain muscle tissue as well as adipose tissue. For the esophagus, starting now, we are starting to discuss what we have talked about earlier about the tubular part of the digestive system, wherein, again, we have one, two, three, four layers, okay? Again, as a review, we would have your tunica mucosa from here to here, and then your submucosa from here to here, and then your muscular layer from here to here, and your serosa or adventitia. Again, your mucosa is composed of three sublayers: the epithelial tissue, the lamina propria, and the thin muscle layer of your muscularis mucosae, which is separate from the thick tunica muscularis here. Okay? So histologically, it's like this, okay? For the, again, we have our lumen, our tunica muscularis from here to here. Again, we have our um, epithelium, lamina propria, muscularis mucosae. All of them is part of our tunica mucosa. Then from here to here, we have our submucosa. From here to here, we have our muscularis layer, which is usually divided into two: inner circular and outer longitudinal layer. And then finally, we have our serosa or adventitia. Okay? Again, here, you can see that from the esophagus until the large intestine, actually, all of these layers are almost always present, and then they just differ in the innermost lining, the epithelial layer, and some layers, such as your muscularis mucosa of your tunica mucosa, may either disappear or be present or become well developed, etc. Okay? So for the esophagus, the key point is that the lining epithelium of your esophagus is still not simple columnar epithelium. It has no absorptive capabilities, so it is just a conduit, a passageway of the food that has been chewed in the mouth going to the stomach. But of course, that's for the lining epithelium. The glands are actually found in the submucosal layer. And then for the muscle layer, the muscle layer actually changes type depending on which segment it is. The more that the esophagus is near the mouth area, it will be skeletal in nature. If the esophagus segment is near the stomach area, it will be more smooth muscle. Okay? But the key point is that for the esophagus, the lining epithelium is stratified squamous epithelium. Okay? Because it still contains, it does not have any absorptive capabilities yet. Okay? And again, for some species, it may be keratinized if the food is fibrous for added protection. Okay? Again, stratified squamous epithelium, lamina propria, muscularis mucosae, the three of these composes your mucosa, then you have your submucosa, and then you would have your muscularis layer. Next, let's discuss the typical stomach of your carnivore. So all of the subparts that we will be discussing, the cardiac, fundic, and pyloric, will be glandular in nature. So these three subregions of a glandular stomach actually will differ in their ratio or how extensive they are depending on the species. For example, normally in carnivores such as your dog, the fundic region is the most well-developed area or the largest area, the glandular area. I mean the most biggest glandular part. Okay, although your cardiac and pyloric areas are also glandular, your fundic area will have the most developed glands. Okay, and then depending on the animal, it can either be extensive or smaller, such as in your horse and pig. And then, of course, for your ruminants, you would also have your additional non-glandular areas here and here. In the horse, it's just termed as non-glandular. In the ruminant, it's so extensive that the non-glandular area of the stomach would have further subdivisions. We will discuss that later. But for now, let's try to see the histological differences between the cardiac, fundic, and pyloric areas of the stomach. Okay? Here, we can see the junction between the esophagus to the cardiac area. So again, from stratified squamous epithelium, we would have the typical digestive epithelium, which is simple columnar epithelium, which may contain or which usually contains a lot of goblet cells. Okay? So in um, the stomach epithelium is just flat, but it would have pits or invaginations. But it doesn't have villi yet, which is basically a feature of your intestines, okay? So there are no villi or finger-like projections protruding in the lumen of the stomach. Instead, there are invaginations or pits which houses your goblet cells, and deeper you would have in the lamina propria, you would have your glands, okay? So depending on the different area of the stomach, you would have different um, um, depths to your gastric pits and different um, thickness of your stomach glands, okay? So in general, your cardiac region would have the shortest area of gastric pits and thinnest area of stomach glands, while your fundic region would have the most well-developed glandular area, and then your pyloric area would have the deepest gastric pits. But all of them in general would have the glandular area as well. Again, no villi. Okay? If we focus on the gastric gland area, we can see that it's actually composed of differently staining cells. So when zooming in, actually the gastric glands would be containing your parietal cells, which are more pinkish in color, and then your chief cells. So your parietal cells would produce your hydrochloric acid, and then your chief cells would produce your pepsinogen. Your hydrochloric acid and pepsinogen play a role in producing your stomach juices, which plays the major role in chemical digestion. Okay? So pepsinogen is mainly for breaking down peptides or proteins. Again, these are the cells which produce your stomach acids or stomach digestive juices. Okay, so these cells found in the deeper layers will produce the digestive acidic juices, while the cells in your gastric pits would produce the mucus, which would serve as a protection against the gastric juices produced by the deeper layers or the gastric glands. Okay, so the mucus layer will actually prevent the stomach from digesting itself. And when you are stressed, usually the ability of your lining epithelium to produce mucus to protect itself is hindered or lowered, such that you are You can produce ulcers because the digestive juices produced by the gastric glands also is not separated from the stomach lining by the mucus layer. So that's why you would usually develop ulcer when you are stressed, as well as hyperacidity, and you will feel stomach ache. You will get stomach ache. But normally, if you are functioning well and you're not stressed, then the mucous neck cells here in the gastric pits will produce the mucin. Okay. Let's talk about mainly about the non-glandular areas of the ruminant stomach. Because for the abomasum, it would still contain basically the same cardiac, fundic, and pyloric regions of your carnivore stomach. So let's focus on the rumen, reticulum, and omasum. So again, for our ruminants, you would have these subcompartments, okay? So food will actually go into the rumen first before it will go to the reticulum and finally into the omasum before it goes into the abomasum where um, the glandular part is present. Okay, so mainly the glandular parts of the ruminant stomach mainly functions in the breakdown of the cellulose and the fibers, as well as the absorption also of volatile fatty acids, metabolism basically of volatile fatty acids. Anyway, um, grossly, it is very easy to differentiate the different compartments of the ruminant non-glandular stomach. The first part is your rumen, which basically looks like your towel, right? In Tagalog, it's called tuwalya, or the Tagalog term for towel. And then, histologically, it would look like this. So each of these rumen papilla corresponds to this. And then you will have your lamina propria submucosa reaching into each papilla. And since the rumen is the first part of the non-glandular stomach, instead of simple columnar epithelium, it would have your, just like your esophagus, it would have your stratified squamous epithelium here. Okay? And then, of course, retic muscularis externa. For the reticulum, which has a honeycomb structure, grossly, we would have your papillae as well, but this time you would have your primary and then your secondary reticular folds or crests. In the case of reticulum, you would also have the presence of your muscularis mucosae component at the tip of every primary papillae. And then still you would have your tunica muscularis here. Okay. For your omasum, the lamina or omasal folds are very extensive. The layman term for this in Tagalog is book or libro because it looks like the pages of a book. And since the omasal papillae is very, very extensive, this time around, the muscularis mucosae is very extensive again and well developed. And in the bigger folds of your omasal plica or lamina, the muscle layer even extends inside it. And still, the epithelium is keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. So as a comparison between your rumen, reticulum, and omasum, again, the rumen would only have primary papilla, the reticulum would have secondary papillas, and the muscularis mucosae layer only at the tip, while your omasum would have your muscularis mucosae throughout the length of the whole fold, together with the tunica muscularis itself, especially if the fold is very big. Next, let's go to the small intestine. So for the small intestine, actually histologically they do not differ so much, no? They just differ from your stomach in that they contain finger-like projections which extend into the lumen, which are called your villi. Okay, your stomachs do not contain this. Okay, may it be um, well, not considering the non-glandular stomach of your ruminant. But for the glandular stomach, usually, it will not contain any projections or villi. So your villi, the term villi is only used for the small intestine, okay? Because the projections found in the rumen, reticulum, endomassum, they are called folds or papilla, okay? For the villi of your duodenum, jejunum, and ileum, usually the duodenum would have the thicker and more robust looking villi, where your jejunum would have thinner villi, and your ileum would have the stubby or club shaped short villi. And then between the three segments, your ileum would contain the most amount of your lymphatic nodules or Peyer's patches. While between the duodenum and the jejunum, your duodenum would contain a very well-developed submucosal gland system, while your jejunum would not have that submucosal glands. Okay. Another feature of your small intestine is this part, which is called as your intestinal crypts or crypts of Lieberkühn. So crypts in general pertains to the underground chambers in mostly in Europe where they actually keep their dead. Okay, so it's called crypt because technically it is found in the deeper layers of your intestine. So these are your crypts. Your crypts would also contain your Paneth cells. So these Paneth cells usually would contain reddish granules and they have antimicrobial properties which help maintain the microbiotic flora of your small intestine. Okay? Another comparison of the different segments of the small intestine. But basically, the small intestine mainly functions for the absorption of the nutrients that has been digested, chemically digested or broken down in the stomach. Okay, so if you will see here in the intestine, there are not so much goblet cells because there's no need for too much mucus or mucus protection because the intestine does not generally produce um, stomach acids. Okay, next let's go to the large intestine. So again, we said that in the stomach there are no villi, in the large, but in the small intestine there's the villi. In the large intestine there are no villi again. What is only remaining are your crypts or in your intestinal glands. Okay? So only the intestinal crypts or glands are remaining in your large intestine. But all the other layers are still basically the same. So here you can see your ileum or the last segment of your small intestine which contains your villi. And here are the crypts or the intestinal glands which is the only one remaining in your cecum or the first segment of your large intestine. So again, in the large intestine, you would see again an abundance of goblet cells in these intestinal glands. Okay. What else? In the parts of your colon as well as your cecum, especially in large animals which have bigger colons and cecums, they would need the support of this tapeworm-looking band of muscle, which is called your taenia, coli if it's found in the colon, and ceci if it's found in the cecum. histologically, it basically looks like this. It's basically just a band of smooth muscle tissue located outside your typical muscularis layer. Okay? So again, you have your crypts of Libercon in the colon, but you don't have any villi anymore. And then, just like in the junction of your esophagus into your stomach, we have the reverse of that. You would have your simple columnar epithelium, which changes into stratified squamous epithelium by the time it goes into your anal part. Okay, so the anus needs a lining epithelium that is not for absorption nor digestion. It just needs an epithelium that is more robust and sturdy against the passage of poop and more sturdy against external or mechanical abrasions. Okay? So again, in general here, we have your small intestine wherein you have your villi and then you have your crypts and then you have your large intestine wherein only the crypts remain and there is no more villi. Okay? So in general, here you can see the stratified squamous epithelium of your non-glandular areas of alimentary tract such as your esophagus or your rectum or the non-glandular stomach of your ruminant, which would have papillas here protruding, and then the stomach, which would have your gastric pits full of mucous cells, which produce the mucin that protects it from the highly acidic product of your gastric glands found in the deeper layers, again, which contains your parietal cells and chief cells, which produce your HCl or hydrochloric chloric acid and your pepsinogen respectively. And then we have your intestine, which is mainly functioning for the absorption, thus it has your villi, and then your crypts of Libercon, which is the only one remaining by the time we are in our colon or rectal area. Okay, now we go to the avian version of things. Let's just concentrate on the specialized structures. So for the tongue, the avian tongue is still lined by your stratified squamous epithelium. Key difference is that the avian tongue usually contains your entoglossal bone, here and here. So here you can see your bone, but I think here it's still cartilaginous in nature. And then you would also see very extensive presence of lingual glands. And your avian species would also have your taste buds, which can be contained in the beak as well as in the tongue area. So here you can see a study which has specifically labeled the taste buds in your avian species. But it is not as well developed and as numerous as those found in the other domestic species. So here we have your crop or the outpocketing area in your esophagus, which has a thick keratinized um, epithelium. And then we would have your esophagus, which also has your stratified squamous epithelium, and then very well developed esophageal glands in the submucosa. And here you have your proventriculus. So the proventriculus is the glandular stomach and is very delicious when ingested because it has a lot of glands. Okay, and here you would have your mucosal layer, submucosal layer, and then the muscular layer. And then the mucosal layer will still basically have the same structure as your domestic species counterpart. The main difference is that the submucosal glands is very well developed. Okay, so subparts of your proventricular glands would include the glands themselves, and the primary ducts, secondary and tertiary ducts. And then finally, or not really finally, next to it would be your ventriculus, which follows your proventriculus. This is your muscular stomach. So it has a very, very thick muscle layer, but still it will have the same um, gastric mucosal layer and an additional thick cuticle, which changes name depending on the reference. Sometimes it's called choline or pectin or kaolin, but it's the same hardy substance which protects the gastric mucosa from the grits or tiny stones, which is usually found in the ventriculus, which helps the avian species to grind very hard food particles, since basically your avian species do not have teeth. So they would need to um, the help of stones in the ventriculus to grind their food before they can absorb it in the intestines. The intestinal histological features of your avian is almost the same as with your other domestic species that we discussed earlier. Next, for the cloaca. So the cloaca is actually a series of segments, no? The first part is the one that is directly connected to your rectum is the coprodeum, and then the one which actually houses the openings of your urogenital system is your urodeum, and then the last segment is your proctodeum. So the innermost lining of your cloaca is still lined by simple columnar epithelium, while the outermost area, again, if it is more exposed to outside components, it would need the stratified squamous epithelium. So here you can see the junction between the outer areas of the proctodeum and the inner areas which contain your simple columnar epithelium. Okay, so don't forget to take your attendance. So this concludes the first part of the digestive system.